Michael Harrison moved through the basement corridors of the Harrison County Courthouse like a ghost in fluorescent light. The rustle of manila folders and the quiet hum of old ventilation were the soundtrack of his days. No robe, no gavel, no high office. Just a desk, a badge that read Records Specialist 3, and 22 years of being unseen. He didn't mind. He wasn't here to be noticed. Michael was the kind of man who remembered details no one else did. He could tell you which filing cabinet housed the 2013 zoning dispute between a local barber and the city council. He knew which circuit clerk liked double staples and which judge insisted on blue ink. The courthouse was a machine, and he understood its gears intimately. But over the past 6 months, something in the system had begun to grind. It started with a folder. A missing civil complaint. Nothing new, really, except Michael was the one who logged it in. It was a housing discrimination case, filed by a black woman against a well-connected realtor. 2 weeks later, a paralegal came looking for it. Michael searched. No trace. He checked the logs, his own signature, the date, the docket number. But the folder? Gone. The paralegal was polite but confused. Maybe it never made it to you. Michael almost believed her. Almost. Until it happened again. And again. By late spring, he had documented 11 such cases, all filed by black plaintiffs, all lost between the clerk's office and courtroom processing. The pattern whispered to him in quiet patterns: delayed assignments, missing paperwork, reassigned judges. At first, he thought it was negligence. Then he saw the red tag, a single post-it note attached to a folder he recovered from behind a drawer, one of the lost cases. On it, in red ink, was a judge's initials and a number, T3. Michael didn't know what it meant. Not yet, but it chilled him. Michael didn't talk about it, not to coworkers, not even to Denise, his sister and only family in town. He began keeping copies of the lost files, quietly scanning each one into a hidden flash drive he wore under his shirt. Not illegal, he reasoned. He had authorized access. And if the system was swallowing justice, someone had to remember it was ever there. Each night, after the courthouse lights dimmed, he'd linger an hour longer, copying, cataloging, comparing. His Excel spreadsheet grew with silent fury. 11 became 19. 19 became 26. Always black plaintiffs, always delays. He started noting who handled intake, which judges were assigned, how long each case took, if it reached court at all. One name started showing up more than others: Judge Raymond D. Kellerman. Michael had known Kellerman since his early days. The man was charming, sharp, always quick with a smile. But Michael also remembered a comment from a retirement party years ago. Something about keeping order in the court, the way God intended. It hadn't struck him then. It did now. By early June, Michael made a decision. He printed out one case summary, just one, and left it in an envelope outside the office of a civil rights attorney in the same building. He didn't sign it. 2 days later, the attorney filed a motion to reopen a previously dismissed case. 3 days later, Michael was called into human resources. The HR manager, a young white man named Colin, with a nervous smile, shuffled papers and cleared his throat. "We've received notice of a breach in document protocol," he began. A confidential case file was accessed without documented purpose. Michael said nothing. "We're not accusing you, we're clarifying procedure." Michael smiled faintly. "Am I being investigated?" No, just transparency matters." He left the meeting knowing he'd been watched, maybe for weeks. That night, his flash drive went into a secure USB vault at home. He wiped his courthouse laptop clean, and the next morning, he walked in with a burner phone, a private email account, and a new plan. He wasn't just going to collect data anymore. He was going to expose the whole system. Michael began his mornings with a simple ritual: coffee in a steel mug, a glance at the county bulletin board, and a silent count of how many steps it took from the courthouse lobby to his office. 29. 29 steps, enough to remind him how close injustice could sit to routine. He spent that summer weaving himself deeper into the inner circuits of the courthouse. Most days, no one noticed. Michael had mastered the art of invisibility. He learned which judges left their offices unlocked during lunch, which clerks reused old printer cartridges that sometimes stored ghost images of scanned files. He watched. He waited. The more he saw, the clearer the picture became. There wasn't one smoking gun, no single villain twirling a mustache and shredding complaints. It was quieter than that, more systemic. Complaints filed by Black plaintiffs were disproportionately flagged for additional review. Those reviews were done behind closed doors, often by Kellerman's staff, and most never made it to hearing. But then came case number 734B, filed by a young Black man named Deontay Walker. It was a lawsuit against a suburban police department for excessive force during a traffic stop. The case was submitted, logged, and inexplicably rerouted to a probate clerk's office, an office that didn't even handle civil rights cases. Michael noticed the reroute not through the official docket, but because the case number appeared on a scanned postage label he happened to be auditing. Coincidence, he was told, a clerical mislabel. That night, Michael drove out to meet Deontay in person. He found him working the night shift at a local warehouse. They sat in Deontay's car during his break, windows rolled down, sweat pooling along their collars. Michael explained who he was, what he'd seen. "You're telling me my case got lost on purpose?" Deontay asked, stunned. Michael hesitated. "I'm saying I don't think it ever had a chance." Deontay leaned back in his seat, staring at the roof. "Man, they cracked my ribs, took my dignity. Now they want to erase me on paper, too?" Michael looked down at the flash drive he'd brought with him. "Not if I can help it." From that night forward, Michael stopped watching and started acting. He made it his mission to find every case Kellerman's circle touched. He built timelines, visual maps, data overlays. He recruited help in quiet ways. An IT tech named Aaliyah, who thought she was fixing his password. A temp clerk named Jonah, who loved puzzles and didn't ask questions. The circle tightened. One morning, Jonah dropped a file on Michael's desk. It had been scheduled for deletion the next day. The plaintiff was a school teacher suing for wrongful termination after reporting racial slurs from her principal. Her case had been inadvertently closed and flagged for digital purge. Michael read the file twice, then stared at the deletion order. The digital signature at the bottom was Kellerman's. But Kellerman wasn't authorized to process deletions. He wasn't supposed to have access at all. That night, Michael called Aaliyah. "Can you get me logs from Kellerman's user ID?" She hesitated. "You know I could lose my job for that." "I know," Michael said softly, "but someone's losing more." She didn't answer. But 2 days later, a small package arrived at Michael's P.O. box. Inside, an SD card, a note that read, "You didn't get this from me," and a list of login timestamps. Michael matched the data against his spreadsheet. The overlap was damning. Files flagged for purge all passed through Kellerman's digital fingerprint. Always at odd hours, always after complaints were filed by Black plaintiffs, always without protocol. The conspiracy wasn't theoretical anymore. It was documented. He needed a bigger move. Michael contacted a local podcast producer anonymously. He sent them redacted case summaries, voice-altered audio of whistleblowers, even a sample of the altered logs. The producer, intrigued but cautious, wanted proof. Real names, real people, real stakes. He knew what that meant. He'd have to come forward himself. But first, he had one last thing to confirm. One more ghost in the system. The ghost was case number 508K, a wrongful death suit filed by a mother named Loretta Jenkins. Her son, Malik, had died in county jail under mysterious circumstances. His official cause of death was listed as suicide. No autopsy, no video evidence released. The case had vanished 2 years ago after being returned for additional documents. It never reappeared. Michael remembered that file. He had seen it once, barely, when it was still in the intake queue. The image haunted him. Loretta in a church dress, standing alone with a manila folder, clutched like a shield. No lawyer, no crowd, just grief, wrapped in bureaucracy. He searched for it now. Nothing in the digital system, nothing in the archived bins. But Jonah, ever curious, found a misfiled envelope in the civil archives, labeled L. Jenkins, Property Dispute. Inside were photocopies of police reports, medical logs with entire pages blacked out, and a handwritten note, not to proceed, see Internal Code 12B. Michael stared at the code. 12B meant classified due to threat of community disruption. He sat with it for a long time. How many others? He ran the code through Aaliyah's login logs. There were 14 matches over the last 3 years, nearly all tied to Black families, nearly all involving cases against public institutions, police, schools, hospitals. All had been buried with similar language, insufficient documentation, premature filing, not jurisdictionally aligned. The pattern was no longer just corruption. It was strategy, coordinated, institutionalized, and it had to be exposed. Michael crafted a file, simple, clean, explosive. He titled it The Silence Directive. It contained summaries of the buried cases, screenshots of deletion orders, and timestamps. He included one haunting section labeled Voices Erased. There he placed anonymized quotes from the original filings. Deontay's words, Loretta's pleas, the school teacher's resignation letter. Before sending it, he wrote a single sentence on the cover page. This isn't lost paperwork. It's policy. The podcast producer responded within hours. We're in. We'll feature this on our investigative series, but you have to appear, at least voice only. Otherwise, it sounds like a conspiracy theory. Michael didn't sleep that night. He thought about everything he'd gathered, the lines he'd crossed. Then he called Loretta. He hadn't spoken to her before. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice worn but steady. I'm calling about your son, he said. A pause. Then, which one? Malik. Silence. He expected her to hang up. Instead, she whispered, I thought nobody remembered. I never forgot. He explained what he'd found. When he finished, Loretta said, You want me to talk? I'd like to give you the option. Another pause. Only if I can say his name. You can say it as many times as you need. 3 days later, the podcast episode aired, filed and forgotten. Michael's voice, digitally altered, laid out the facts. Then Loretta spoke, then Deontay, then others. One by one, voices filled the silence. The response was immediate. The county PR office issued a statement calling the podcast deeply misleading. Kellerman denied all wrongdoing. The sheriff's office refused comment. But others, judges, clerks, local activists, began to come forward. Michael found himself standing not behind the curtain anymore, but at the center of a storm. One morning, he arrived at work to find his badge deactivated. His desk had been emptied. An escort waited by the elevator. Effective immediately, said the HR letter. Administrative review pending. But he didn't panic. He had expected this. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Reporters, activists, 3 mothers he didn't know, holding signs with their children's faces. One sign read, Not lost, buried. Michael stood there, not as an employee, but as a witness, maybe even a spark. He wasn't done. Michael couldn't sleep anymore. Not because of fear, but because of clarity. The kind that buzzes behind your eyes and makes dreams feel irrelevant. He spent his nights reviewing documents, sending encrypted messages to journalists, and cataloging every case that matched the pattern. The more he uncovered, the deeper the rot seemed to run. Jonah stayed by his side. He had moved out of his parents' house, claiming he needed space. But Michael knew the truth. He had seen too much. Their tiny apartment, filled with takeout boxes and manila folders. Some nights they didn't talk. They just read. Other nights, they debated where the cracks began. Was it the judges, the clerks, the training manuals? But they both knew the real answer. It was all of it. One night, Jonah asked, if this is so obvious, why didn't anyone stop it? Michael didn't answer at first. Then he said, because no one wanted to believe the system was designed to disappear people. They had crossed a line now. This wasn't just a leak. It was an exposé in motion. National outlets had picked up the podcast. Protesters were camping outside the courthouse. Civil rights lawyers were filing motions to reopen archived cases. And Michael, he was asked to testify. A House subcommittee on civil rights sent an official summons. They wanted to know how local policies were obstructing federal protections. He read the invitation 3 times. This wasn't part of the plan. I'm not the story, he told Jonah. Jonah stared at him. You are if you don't speak. The night before the hearing, Michael stood alone in a motel room near D.C. The lamp buzzed. His tie felt too tight. He rehearsed what he might say. Then he opened a folder and reread the original intake form from Case 508K. Under additional comments, Loretta had written, "My son mattered. I need someone to say it back." Michael said it out loud. He mattered. He said it again. The next morning, he stood before the subcommittee. Cameras, flashbulbs, men and women with suits and sharp questions. He spoke slowly, clearly, not as a whistleblower, but as someone who had seen too much to remain quiet. He told them about the classification codes, the disappearing dockets, the internal memos marked 12B, the fact that nearly all affected were Black or Latino, the fact that no audit had ever been conducted. Then he told them about Loretta and Deontay and the ones who never even got that far. When he finished, one congresswoman, a Black woman from Georgia, asked him, "What would justice look like to you?" Michael paused. He said, "I'm not sure yet, but I know what injustice looks like, and I know how many files it takes to bury a name." The room was silent. After the hearing, people shook his hand. He barely felt it. The flood had started, and there was no stopping it now. A week later, the governor of the state announced a formal investigation into the Office of Civil Case Intake. Michael's testimony was quoted in every major outlet. But it came at a cost. His landlord received pressure to evict him. Old friends stopped returning calls. One night, a rock smashed through his window, and a note was left behind. "Go silent or go missing." He didn't tell Jonah. But the next day, they both packed and moved to a friend's place out of town. Still, he kept going. The flood of buried cases grew. One by one, families reached out. One woman mailed him a hand-drawn portrait of her son. Another sent a cassette tape of a 911 call that had never been entered into evidence. Michael created a digital archive, public, decentralized, impossible to erase. He called it the Ledger. He uploaded every file, every statement, every name. And at the top of the site, he placed a single sentence: "If the system forgets you, we won't." Months passed. Michael's archive, the Ledger, became more than a database, it became a movement. Students at law schools cited it in papers. Judges whispered about it in chambers. Civil rights groups used it as a cornerstone for federal lawsuits. It was no longer just about Deontay or Loretta or any single file. It was about all of them, and it was growing. One afternoon, a stranger knocked on Michael's door. A soft-spoken white woman, maybe in her 60s, holding a cardboard box. "I think these belong to you," she said. Inside were documents, dozens of them, intake forms from 1994 to 2007, most labeled with the dreaded 12B. She said her late husband had worked as a courthouse administrator. She had found the box in their attic. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought maybe someone should." Michael sat on the floor for hours reading them. It was the same script. Wrong name, incomplete dates, missing signatures. As if someone had photocopied the same mistake across years. It chilled him. It also confirmed what he already suspected. This wasn't negligence. It was orchestration. At night, Michael stared at the ceiling. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a person who'd opened a door that no one wanted to admit was there. The emails didn't stop. A former court stenographer confessed to deleting transcripts. A retired judge apologized in a trembling voicemail, saying, "I knew and I did nothing." A janitor wrote that he used to find shredded documents stuffed in bathroom bins. Some called him brave. Others called him a traitor. He didn't care. Jonah kept him grounded. Whenever the noise got too loud, Jonah would say, "Are you still listening to the families? Then you're doing the right thing." They stopped answering press calls. Michael didn't want to become a symbol. He just wanted the system to change. But symbols are hard to avoid when your story echoes across the country. One day, Loretta showed up at his door. Michael opened it stunned. She looked older, stronger. "I'm here," she said, "because I think we still have work to do." She had started organizing mothers of the disappeared, women whose children had been swallowed by legal limbo. They called themselves the Unforgotten. Michael gave them access to the ledger. They added notes, photos, last seen dates. They built profiles for the media and pushed for independent reviews. For the first time, Michael wasn't leading. He was following. It felt right. 1 year after his testimony, the Justice Department opened a federal investigation. The term 12B became shorthand for systemic civil rights neglect. Some states banned the classification altogether. And Michael? He began teaching, not in a university, but in community centers. He taught families how to request records, how to recognize red flags, how to make noise that couldn't be ignored. At one workshop, a young girl, no more than 12, raised her hand. "Do you think the system will ever be fair?" Michael paused. He said, "I think it can be afraid of us. That's a start." The room clapped. Later that night, he added a new section to the ledger, not for missing files, but for the people rebuilding what had been torn. He called it the Reclaimers. He didn't need applause. He didn't need closure. He just needed them to be seen.